Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. Hey there, Brian.
Hey, Ani.
How are you?
I'm doing well. And you?
I'm good. Ready for episode 131 today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certain that everybody's going to really like it.
We're going to jump right into it. Going to take a leap.
Oh, I knew we were talking about certainty, but I didn't know the rest. So we're talking about taking a leap into certainty today?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're talking about the mindset behind taking a successful leap of faith. You know, oftentimes people are in a place in their life where they know it's time to make a change and they're having a hard time doing it. And they're like, should I just take a leap of faith? But there's resistance to that. And there's a reason why there's resistance to that. Because some coaches and, influencers out there can just say, basically, just take the leap. You just got to do it.
Just do it.
Do it. But there's real reasons inside of a person's nervous system why that's hard and why it's actually not always successful and how you can actually make it successful. Mm-hmm. That's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, it seems really irreverent too, to the fact that the leap of faith very often will confront things that matter a lot in our lives, responsibilities, relationships with people we care about. Mm-hmm. And so I think that just do it kind of attitude is quite a lot of BS.
Yeah, and it can be really naive sometime and undermining. And so that's what we're going to talk about.
Great.
Yeah. But maybe before we start jumping into that, maybe we can just talk about what are some signs that it might be time for you to actually make a change. And there's pressure building, where it feels like for you, the only way out of your current circumstances is to take a leap of faith.
Well, that seems like a sign right there. Yeah. A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure, right? So one of the things is, I think about if you're in a situation where you're frustrated, like
chronic
more
frustration.
than 50% of the time with your current life situation. And that could be a work situation. It can be a relationship situation. It can be a health situation. It can be a financial situation, whatever it is. But if in your life, like more than 50% of the time that you're like frustrated about it, I think that's probably a pretty good sign that it's time to create some change.
Yeah.
Right? And that pressure will keep building.
Yeah. Continued frustration. I like how you said more than 50% of the time. I think that's a really good kind of way to gauge it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, you brought up a couple days ago, Ani, when we were chatting, in our kitchen about the idea that sometimes you can have frustration in your life, and it can be more than 50% of the time, but there can be some built-in mechanisms to decompress that frustration that would then somehow convince you that maybe you don't need to make a change.
I did, huh? What did I say?
Well, it was something along the line of vacation.
Oh, well, I think basically I said if you can afford to take enough vacations that you might be able to ignore the fact that you really do have this thing that you really want to take a leap of faith on. Mm-hmm. But because, you've been able to depressurize the system, it's kind of like a privilege thing to some degree, right? Like enough, maybe financial privilege is one way to think about it. I'm sure there's multiple ways to think about it, but not everybody has the luxury of working a few days a week and then taking off the weekends, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say that you can work during the week, but you actually have the luxury of taking off on the weekends. You don't have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Well, then you have some kind of privilege around being able to decompress so that the pressure around making the leap might not feel like as big of a deal. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to think about because sometimes people come to us and they say, I'm in a really tight spot, or I have quite a bit of urgency, whether it's around a relationship or a job or money. And, the laws, the natural laws would tell us that it's actually good to, that's not just a bad situation. Like there's got to be a good part to that situation too, because there's not really inherent good, bad, right, or wrong. So the part of the benefit to think about it rather than good, bad, right, or wrong, to think of it in pros and cons more. Part of the benefit of that situation is because you have urgency, you probably will actually do something
Hmm.
about it, or you need to do something about it. But when you
Yep.
don't need to do something about it, it can be harder to take that leap.
Yeah. So I think so far what we're building to here is when it comes to taking a leap of faith, that there's something, there's an important component of pressure, urgency
Yeah.
kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
that's building into our what we're talking about today. But to your point, yeah, if you have the privilege to be able to depressurize the system, then the system doesn't pressurize itself enough to the point where you have
You do
enough
something.
frustration to say, I've got to change something about this,
Hmm.
right? Because some of the scenarios that happen, it happened for me for a really long time. For a while, I spent a lot of time knowing that, like a longing, like I had a longing that there was something else that I was supposed to do with my life.
Hmm.
There was something more that I was supposed to do and have in my life. I couldn't name it. I had like vague ideas around it, sort of thing. I wasn't ready to take a leap at that point because I didn't have enough urgency in order to do it. But I did feel like I was kind of like dying on the vine
Yeah.
in some ways too. So that might be an experience that like our listeners are having too. Like, how do you know that it's time to create change? Well, if on a regular basis, like you wake up every day on a regular basis, knowing that there's more to life than you're living right now,
Yeah.
well, that's a pretty good sign that it's you need to create enough urgency actually to change something. Because if you don't, you'll just keep withering.
Yeah, and this might lose me some friends here, but I feel like there's a level of like victim consciousness, which is different than victimization, different consciousness that can come around where we're just like waiting for the universe actually to take more responsibility for us to make the change or not than we're willing to take for
Hmm.
ourselves. Like to just kind of you know, wait for it to get worse because the universe will knock on your door. The universe will do a little tap first, and those are those like nudges and those kind of like that longing, and then it'll start to knock a little louder, right?
Hmm.
And then it might get the two by four.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are waiting for the universe to give them a two by four when, like, take some responsibility for your life.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, I remember time when I wasn't willing to take the knocks on the door. I was in my job as an occupational therapist. This was a while ago, in my 20s, and I was so frustrated and miserable. I'd cry on my lunch hour and then go back to
Yeah.
work.
So that's like one of those signs, right?
Come on. And so I would cry, I would call people, I would tell them how much I hated it. I knew there was something more for my life. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't willing to leave. And I had started learning about holistic practices and I was starting to do them in my practice. They were working great. They were getting great results. People were giving me hairy eyeballs. This was 20 years ago when that kind of thing happened even more often than now.
Hmm.
But Brian, I waited to get fired. I mean, talk about a two by four. I took no responsibility for my life and my condition. And it wasn't until I got fired that I decided to, like, hey, this is an opportunity to do something a little bit different. I had the opportunity all the time, but I didn't take it.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, how sometimes like losing your job is actually the greatest gift you can receive from the universe when you know you have more
Yeah.
to do with your life. You've been longing for something to change.
Yeah.
You don't have enough energy. I'm not saying you personally, but
Yeah.
as the individual doesn't have enough energy to act on it.
Yeah.
And so like I was dying on the vine too. And so I had to get to myself to a point where I had to position with enough pressure to be able to, again, create change or create that urgency.
Losing your job, losing a relationship,
Sure, yeah.
losing a colleague, losing a member of your team, like
Getting a huge tax
losing,
bill.
getting in a car accident, getting
Yep.
in a tax bill, losing a client, like
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah.
exactly.
So there's some,
Those are doorways.
yeah. So there's some other signs to look for that you might be building to the point where a two by four may be coming, sort of thing, in that change. Because if you're longing for something different, it's just not coming. You personally feel like you're dying on the vine, but it's also the universe kind of calling you to create some change for yourself. So another one is, you've built a relatively secure kind of cage for yourself to live in,
Yeah.
and you're just not really fully living your life. But you've built a really nice cage,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so
Got a nice couch, nice cushy blanket. Why would you leave?
yeah, there's that visual I love to kind of show and think about with, the bird inside of the cage with the door wide open,
It's not
but the
coming.
bird's not leaving, right? Staying in the cage because it's really, really comfortable in there.
Yeah.
Even though there's so much amazing stuff outside of the cage
Yeah.
to go. Another one is, and I think you kind of spoke to this with your crying on the lunch hour. I think another one thing is you dread Mondays,
Yeah.
like the Monday dread.
Yeah.
Like, so, we've met people who are still working in jobs, and they say Sundays are like the worst day of the week because they're
Yeah.
dreading going back to work on Monday. And I
I
remember having those experiences when I
do
worked
as
in a
well.
job,
Yeah.
um, sort of thing too. So if you're dreading Mondays, especially when coming back after one of those decompressing vacations,
Yeah.
if that feels like dread to
Uh,
you, then that's a pretty good sign that you are not fully living your life.
I would say dreading what fill in the blank.
Mhm.
Like, check out what you're dreading because there's something there
Mhm. Yeah.
for you to decode in terms of what's going on.
Yeah. And then my last kind of example is if you're counting the years to retirement,
Oh, owie. Yeah.
right? So we've worked with people who are like, I only have 10 years left. Only 10 years left till I retire. And I'm thinking, 10 years?
Have you ever had
That's like a
somebody,
lifetime.
have you ever had somebody tell you like months, days, hours,
Oh, yeah.
minutes?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that freaks me
I
out.
only have. I've
Yeah.
had people who know exactly how many
Yeah.
years, months, days,
Yeah.
minutes until they retire.
Yeah.
And I think, wow, like that.
And again, that's retiring. You can also think about it in terms of whatever other things in your life you're counting down
Yep.
towards. So I've had other instances like that in terms of things like relationship challenges and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know how many days I've got to tolerate, suffer through, whatever.
Until it's over. Yeah. So any of those kind of things that we kind of mentioned around the Monday dread, and you're built a comfortable cage for yourself, or you're frustrated more than 50% of the time, like all those things are basically just signs letting you know that it's time for you probably to make a change before a two by four is entered into your life from the universe, because that typically happens like that. And then the universe creates the urgency for you. And often when that happens, it comes along with a whole bunch of other stuff as well that you have to kind of deal with
Hmm.
that we wouldn't have to deal with if you just felt the nudge rather than the two by four.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you're gonna have to surf this thing or get crushed by the wave, and it's easier to surf a smaller wave
Yeah.
than it is a big tsunami.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So here's what we want to know about the mindset around all this in terms of maybe you're getting the news flash right now that you might be on this list, that you might be experiencing this list that we're talking about, and you might be saying, oh my God, yes, I know it's time for me to make a change in something. I can feel that. I can feel I'm dying on the vine. I can feel the frustration on a regular basis. I can't stand Mondays. I know I need to make a change. Well, what mindset do I need then to make that
All
change?
right, I got to take a short detour here about mindset, Brian, because there's a lot of people out there talking about mindset. And we have a certain way of talking about mindset here at the Somatic Coaching Academy. You're going to get it here in a second, I'm sure, with what Brian's prepared for us, that is trauma informed and trauma sensitive. And not everybody here talking about mindset out there is. And I think it's just really noisy around mindset, Brian, because there are so many people who cannot tell you how it works and they just say do it. And I think that is That does not work for most people. For a lot of people, that doesn't work. And I think that then it perpetuates fear within ourselves that we're not good enough and we'll never be able to do it. And I just want to say, listeners, if you have ever had a instance for yourself where you've had some kind of mindset advice, whether it's free online, or you've paid a whole lot of money for it and you haven't been able to do it, and you've thought, what's the matter with me? Hey, maybe it's the fact that the person who is teaching you the mindset stuff didn't know how it worked and isn't trauma informed or trauma sensitive. And then in that regard, it wasn't you. So you don't have to take that extra responsibility on.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that public service
Yeah, for
announcement.
sure. Yeah, I love that. That's great. So the way that it works, and the reason that you're haven't made the move yet, let's just say, we talk a lot about the subconscious mind on the podcast here. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about in the subconscious mind is that the subconscious mind kind of craves safety, and which is true. So if it doesn't feel safe to make the change, whether the subconscious mind is not going to get on board with the change. But I want to just insert a different word for our conversation today, and the word is certainty. The word is around certain rather than safety. Now they can be synonymous in a lot of ways, but let's just kind of shift that word for a moment, just for our conversation.
Okay.
With here's the idea: even if you consciously don't like the situation you're currently in, even if you consciously don't like whatever's going on where you're dreading Mondays, or even if you consciously don't like whatever's happening and you're frustrated more than 50% of the time, whatever, if there's something you consciously don't like, if that, even if what you're experiencing is more certain than the alternative, then your subconscious mind will not get on board with the change.
Right on.
So it's really about certainty.
Yeah.
So even if consciously you don't like it, if it's more certain than the alternative, then your subconscious mind is gonna have you stay put.
I like how you changed that around because I think there's a lot, again, of pressure out there with like, do the thing that scares you. And, again, people don't know how that works in the physiology, so they don't know how to talk about that intelligently. And um, we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves around that. So just that switch there, I think, takes some of the pressure actually out of the conversation to allow somebody to take a deep breath and not feel like they're on a ledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And,
I like that.
and that's because, the opposite of certainty is uncertainty. And uncertainty requires a lot more energy physiologically
Oh,
than certainty
yeah.
does. So if we just go back to, again, the basic kind of function, the current basic currency of the physiology is energy. And the subconscious, the brain, does not like to spend any more energy than it has to. It's really, in a lot of ways, is one of its priorities is energy conservation, just based on millions and millions and millions of years of evolution, where humans, and this is probably all animals in that matter, but humans, like, you never knew when your next food source was coming from. And this is how we still work metabolically. So there's a lot around energy conservation. So uncertainty requires a lot of energy to navigate. So certainty, less energy. And that's one of the reasons basically why your subconscious mind really digs certainty. And going back to what you were saying, Ani, is this is often why losing a job is one of the best things to happen if you are interested in a change. Well,
In
like
your
in
job.
your job change, yeah, or a relationship change, health problem, health change, right? There's a great saying from traditional Chinese medicine around health that enlightenment comes through a sick stomach. That the way to really create urgency for enlightenment is when you're sick, sort of thing. And so this goes to really, I think, the idea of anything that we want to change in our life, that losing something actually creates the urgency. And part of the reason that is, I'm going to do a little segue here, is that when you lose the job, or when you feel like you lose the relationship, it kind of feels like your backup plan got taken away.
Mm.
And that kind of feels like that idea of burning the ships, which is another mindset that a lot of people purport in the mindset industry, right? They say, listen, you just have to burn the ships. You just have to go all in.
Right. That's what burning the ships means if you haven't heard that before. Like you just go all in so you don't have a backup plan.
Yeah. So let me just really quick history lesson around burning the ships. Where's that phrase come from?
From Columbus.
Actually, from Cortez, so close.
Oh,
So Cortez was also a conquistador, a Spanish conquistador.
burning ships.
So in like the 1500s, when Cortez was leaving Cuba, and he left Cuba with like 11 ships and like 600 men to go invade Mexico and the Aztec Empire, the conquistadors around the Aztec Empire. And so these 600 men land on the Mexican, peninsula somewhere. And when they get off their ships and they start to kind of invade Mexico, they're met by thousands and thousands of indigenous people who
Mm-hmm.
are defending their homeland, right?
Sure.
But Cortez was like wanted to commit his soldiers to the task. He actually burned their ships so that the soldiers could either fight or die. That was basically
Well,
talk about urgency.
that sounds like exactly the kind of message that people purport when they talk about burning the
Right,
ships.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
it has that that kind of energy behind it.
Right. And so that's that idea of a leap of faith is I'm leaping, but I don't have a plan.
Right.
I'm leaping, but I don't have a backup plan. I don't have safety measures in place. I don't, that's very, very difficult for the nervous system to navigate.
Yeah.
Right. Now, some people can do that, but
Some people
but I
can't
would
do
say
that.
the
Yes.
majority of people are not built for that. And by the way, I don't think the people who aren't built for that aren't the normal people. I think it's the other way around. I think the
Right.
people who are able to burn the ships are actually
It's a smaller percentage.
atypical,
It's a smaller
right?
percentage.
And potentially neurally wired in a way that isn't advantageous for socialization.
Well, kind
I
of
gotta say
reminds me
that
of
too.
a Mark Hamill kind of thing, the famous rock climber who can climb all
Oh,
kinds of
Arnold or
mon
Alex Honnold.
Oh, sorry. I always do that. I always want to say the Star Wars guy.
Oh yeah, Mark Hamill.
Mark Hamill. But
Different guy.
I
Yeah.
just screw up. Why do I screw that? Anyway, yeah, Alex Hamill, who climbs all kinds of things without ropes. Like they've studied his brain. Like there's some kind of
He has like a kind of a
atypical thing
depressed
going on.
atypical fear mechanism. Yeah,
Right, right,
his amygdala is not as activated as quickly
right.
as the normal
As a
person.
normal
Yeah.
person, right? So I think it's kind of like what you're kind of
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
in some ways. So we want to say if you feel like burning the ships and taking leaps of faith is really frightening for you, then welcome.
You're normal.
Welcome to the human club. Welcome to the human experience sort of thing. So we're not going to tell you need to burn the ships. But so some people can do that. But and by the way, burning the ships does not guarantee it's going to work out.
No,
We
it
want to say that
doesn't.
too, because we get the idea if I could just burn the ships, then I could
Then it would be
succeed.
fine.
Well, maybe,
Yeah,
maybe not.
you'd figure something out.
Because the thing with like burning the ships, the thing with taking that leap of faith is it requires a few things. And one of the things it requires you to abandon things that you might really care about.
That's true. Yeah.
Because you got to burn the ships. It means there might be things on that ship that you really value.
Yeah, I'm just having a personal moment because there was a moment when I was told to burn the ships with something, and there was valuable people on the ship burning. And it was a really pivotal moment in my life, actually, to tell that person who I respected so much and had a lot of clout and all that stuff to say no, because what's on that ship matters too much to me. And I had to grapple with myself for a moment around that. But in hindsight, it was absolutely the best decision for me.
Yeah. So there you go. Right. So that's a great example. So there might be things on the ship that are really important to you. And in that case, burning the ship may end up leaving you with more
Trauma.
trauma
Right.
and regrets and things, and you might feel like that's not really a choice I would have made, which is going to make it difficult for you then to move forward.
Which again leads me to this watch it with the mindset work that isn't trauma informed and trauma sensitive, because mindset, traditional kind of mindset, can actually traumatize and re traumatize people. And it's part of how people expect it to work. But if it doesn't work, throw up their hands and say, oh, well, it didn't work. But I mean, now you've got to deal with your trauma. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. I think, on the mindset kind of topic here, I think what would probably be important to do is I think as an industry is actually start naming the mindset. because there's more than one mindset,
Right.
right? It's not like we have bro culture mindset,
It's
we have,
like
trauma-informed mindset, we have
mindset,
fear mindset,
financial
right?
freedom
So
mindset.
it's not
Like,
like mindset isn't
so
one thing.
mindset isn't one thing, but there is this idea of how to navigate
Mm,
your mind. And the way we would say, I'm sure, is navigate your body mind, like navigate change and navigate transformation. Like there is that because there's mechanisms and ways to navigate a change. But you're totally right. If you're talking about mindset, I always ask my clients this. They say, I need to work on my mindset. And I'll say, well, what mindset would you like? Well, I don't know, like let me think about that. It's very important.
Yeah, to identify what kind of mindset we're actually
What
talking about.
mindset do you want?
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So again, when you take a leap of faith, the one thing that could get in the way is there might be really important things on the ship and you don't want to burn the ship. And that's great to got to consider that. The next thing you have to realize when you're taking a leap of faith or burning the ships is that the chaos potentially and the uncertainty that ensues from that requires a tremendous amount of energy. And you have got to have that energy in deep reserves in order to succeed if you've done that, right? Because we've both been in
Yes.
places in our life where we got the 2x4 and
Yep.
we were like, we need to figure it out.
Yep.
And there were some long days and long nights and
Well,
long weeks and long months
you need to
and
figure,
long years
yeah,
of like staying in
staying in it.
action constantly in order to not drown.
And we have responsibilities. I mean, listeners, I don't know about you, but we've got kids in a house and pets and moms and dads and sisters and brothers and things like that. We've got
Mortgages,
just
yeah,
jobs
debt, and
that
all
we're
that
not,
kind of stuff.
we
Yeah.
don't have endless savings accounts where we can just quit our jobs and, do our transformation, go to the monastery and where we've got 3 square meals and no, we've got responsibilities. We've got to live this life. And so, to your point, all of the energy that it requires, plus you still got to wake up and like do your job and take care of your kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so that leap of faith requires lots of energy. And so again, you have to have that energy in deep reserves. And if you don't, then it's going to be hard to succeed and you could end up finding yourself off in a worse place. Now, I'm not making a case here, by the way, for not changing something.
Like a
I'm
hundred percent.
actually going to
Yeah.
show you, I'm going to show you the mindset trick here, the hack, actually, the mindset hack in order to succeed with this leap of faith. I'm just kind of setting up, you have to set it up a certain way to be successful, is basically what we're saying. Yeah. We're going to say something?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Um, and then here's the other thing. Because the chaos requires so much energy and commitment that even if you get to the other side, you may just collapse at that point.
Yep.
So as soon as you get to actually a place where, oh my God, I finally feel safe, then what we've seen before happen with clients is they just basically collapse,
They have to recuperate.
right? They
They
go
got
in,
nothing left.
they're burned out, something happens in their health, then something else happens in their relationships that they've been ignoring for so long because of the ships that they burned. Something else happens because of that
Yeah.
decision that they made.
Dude, I mean, it just makes sense, right? Cause and effect. You burn the ship, you got to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So far we've set up is you might be in a place where you know it's time for you to make a change. You also might be in a place where you're like, I can't do this burning the ship stuff because I have responsibilities, I have obligations, I have all those kinds of things. So how do I actually make this work for myself? How do I actually get myself moving forward? How do I get myself out of the place where I'm longing and I'm inside of a cage with an open door and I want to create something new for myself? But I'm just stuck in here. Well, here's the little trick, and we'll give you a couple examples around this. Is that the certainty? Because a lot of people, when people make a leap of faith, they want to have a backup plan, and that's important, right? You actually do want to kind of have a backup plan, but it needs to be in a certain way, okay? Because the certainty of your backup plan, if you want to do this really well, the certainty of your backup plan needs to be much less desirable than the uncertainty of moving forward.
Which is not how people usually do it because usually the backup plan is some kind of fantasy world where you get to sip pina coladas on the beach.
Right.
I'm serious, and I'm laughing to myself because you remember the training we were on when we were talking about backup plans.
Yeah.
So we were on a training, and we offhandedly, just as a part of the training, mentioned something about backup plans. I don't know, there must have been maybe 50 people on the call or something like that. And people start popping into the chat, my backup plan is this, and my backup plan is this, and my backup plan. And we had to actually say, like, hang on, everybody. Y'all just took a left turn at Albuquerque and it was not like, pay attention. But the backup plans were all like sipping pina coladas on the beach.
Yeah, they're kind of more, I'm going to buy a coffee shop in Mexico. I'm going to do this or this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If this doesn't work out, then my plan B is so awesome. I'll be off doing that.
Yeah. So you can, now you can realize like what that does to your mindset and to your nervous system when your backup plan is more desirable than the actual plan you have moving forward.
Yeah.
So you need to actually change it around. And I'm gonna give you an example, two examples from my life that kind of talk about how the nervous system works, and then a work example. So one of the first times I actually realized this, I didn't realize this is what I was learning, but back in the days where I did a lot of rock climbing, I remember a situation that was happening. So I was on lead, which means I was climbing with a partner, but I was climbing first. And as you climb up, you put protection in the rock and you clip in, and then you keep climbing up and climbing up and climbing up, and then eventually you build a belay and you bring your partner up behind you, and then you climb again, sort of thing. So I remember I was on the last pitch of this rock climb on this high cliff face. I don't know how many pitches we were up. We were like 1,000, 1,500 feet off the ground. And there's the last pitch. It means we're getting to the top after this. And about halfway up that pitch, it was a very challenging, difficult route. And about halfway up that rock pitch, I came to like actually a pretty comfortable ledge I could stand on and catch my breath and rest. And as I'm on that ledge resting and breathing, I got pretty comfortable there. I got so comfortable there, I didn't want to leave it. And I'm looking up at the I have to I have to step back off of this ledge into this overhanging rock face, and of course, 1,000, 1,500 feet off the ground, and the next part above was the most difficult part of the whole rock climb. So I know like I'm stepping into the most difficult part, and I got pretty comfortable on that ledge. And I honestly I didn't want to get off that ledge, and so I'm like I could just stay here for a while. And so I'm just standing on this ledge, and I don't feel like I can move up. I'm getting more scared. The more comfortable I'm getting on the ledge, the more
The more
scared I'm
scared.
getting of actually stepping off of the ledge, continue this rock route. And then the sun starts to go down. And I realize, okay, the worst thing is if I stay on this ledge and it gets dark, then that's really going to suck. So my partner's down there like, what's going on? Are you okay? What's happening? Did anybody come up? And he's yelling up to me about things. And I'm like, it's okay. I'll be all right in a couple of minutes. But I'm up there for like a half an hour. I'm standing on this ledge because I'm getting freaked out, more and more freaked out. And it's just started getting darker and darker and darker. And then I realized that the certainty of staying on that ledge was very quickly eclipsing the discomfort and the uncertainty of finishing the route. And that was what actually then got me going again. Was when I realized if I stayed there any longer, we were going to be finishing this route in the dark. And I don't think any of us had headlamps. And I was like, this is going to get really, really bad. So that's what kind of got me moving. And so that's when I first kind of realized using that kind of idea consciously in my life. So fast forward then to when I left the very last job, the very last job I worked in, when I left healthcare for good and stepped out on my own in 2008. So that is how many years ago now? Like 2008. So
Almost 20.
almost 20 years, right? That I've been like running my own business. And so the thing is, I remember when it happened. One of the instigations for me leaving was the hospital that I was working for put biometric sensors in that we had to punch a clock every day. So I had to put my thumb on a biometric sensor to punch in and punch out every day. And listen, I was a salaried professional. I worked more than 40 hours a week. I gave everything I had. And for me, it felt like a massive insult to have to put my finger on a thing to punch in and punch out. By the way, if I was 7 minutes late, I get docked. But if I stayed 7 minutes extra, I didn't get paid anymore. So all of a sudden, I'm like, am I really salaried, or am I actually punching the clock hourly? Like, what's going on? And so it was really antagonizing for me. And that was finally one of the things. I had some other. I was sitting waiting for other things to happen. And that's the thing that kind of finally is like, I just got to get out of here. I can't do this anymore. It's just so agitating every single day. So I finally decided to launch my own thing. And here's the thing. So once I launched my own business, the first few years were hard. They were hard, bringing enough money. I was working my butt off, seeing patients, investing a lot of money. I had a new family. I mean, like all that stuff. It was hard. But I'll tell you what, every time it got really hard, what I imagined myself doing was punching that clock with my thumb. I can still see it, putting my thumb on a biometric sensor. And like at 8 minutes after saying, you just lost 15 minutes of pay or something. And I was like, I am never doing that again, ever, ever. And so because that was my backup plan. I was like, I can always go back to being a PT.
Yep.
I could always go back to being a staff PT. But I positioned it such that option was so unpalatable for me that there was nowhere but going forward. I could still do that though. If something happened, could have gone back into the job, you know what? And I'd be punching the clock and I'd still be bringing money in. So there was a backup plan, but it was so unpalatable. There was nothing for me but going forward. So that's really, if you really want to kind of make that leap of faith, the idea is that you need to make the certainty of staying where you are far worse than the uncertainty of the possibilities moving forward.
And all that requires is a few questions. Well, I'm still hanging out on that rock ledge with you from that story. I'm like, that sounds terrifying. Oh my gosh.
So what are the questions? You said you have to ask a few questions.
You just have to ask yourself some questions to be able to see the perspective in a different way. I'm
Okay.
not gonna be able to function after the rock climbing.
Oh, you're done.
Brain is
done after that. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
it's like on pause now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just need to ask yourself some questions about to be able to change your perspective on that. And check out what you think like we were saying, what you think your plan B is, because so often it is the pina colada instead of, we've said that all the time, because I have a similar plan B, well, the same really scenario, but we'll just, when things get rough, we look at each other and go, well, it's either we do this or we go back to the hospital, and there's no question about what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah. So be mindful about how you set that up. And that's the way that you can set up your mindset in order to take a successful leap of faith.
So without further ado, we'll let you get to it. Thanks for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.